Hello everyone. Let's look now at the active and passive verbs, or more specifically, the perfect and pluperfect passive voice. If you remember, what the passive voice means is that the verb is happening to the subject. So let me give you an example. Luke read the book. That is an active verb because Luke, the subject, is doing the verb. If, however, we said the book was read by Luke, then we would change the voice of the verb from active to passive. And we are now going to learn how to do that. Let's start off then with the different forms of this. We have paratos sum, paratos es, paratos est, parati sumus, parati estis, parati sunt. First of all, notice the word paratus. Paratus is the perfect passive participle. We've met that before. So, the form of the Latin form of the perfect passive is the perfect passive participle, paratus, followed by the present tense of the verb to be, sum es est, sumus estis sunt. Again, the perfect passive participle followed by the present tense of the verb to be. That's the first thing, how to form it in Latin. Now in English, it is going to be I was prepared, paratus sum. You were prepared, paratus es. He was prepared, paratus est. If of course it was parata est, it would be feminine and it would mean she was prepared. Parati sumus, we were prepared. Parati estis, you plural were prepared. And finally, parati sunt, they were prepared. If of course they were Amazonian women, then it would be paratai with an ae, paratai sunt. These are the various different forms of the perfect passive. One thing that I would ask you to take notice of is the actual English translation of the perfect passive. I was prepared. Some people find this difficult because they look at the I was, you were prepared, he was prepared, and they think, well, if it's was or were, surely that means that it's imperfect. And they would be wrong, because the imperfect would in fact be I was been prepared, you were been prepared, he was been prepared. Now, this is a very easy form to actually do, and we're going to learn it in about a week's time, but at the moment we don't know it. At the moment we are focusing on the perfect passive. Let's give you an example of a perfect passive in action. In translation. Roma in septem montibus aedificata est. Rome was built on 7 hills. Look at the aedificata. Look at that ending, aedificata. The aedificata tells us that Rome was, of course, feminine, if indeed the a at the end of Roma hadn't told us that. Then we notice the est, the present tense of the form to be. Rome was built on 7 hills. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the perfect passive. Let's look now at the next one. The pluperfect passive. Auditus eram, I had been heard. Auditus eras, you had been heard. Auditus erat, he had been heard. Auditi eramus, we had been heard. Auditi eratis, you plural had been heard. And last of all, auditi erant, they had been heard. Look again at this form, and you will see that the auditus is again the perfect passive participle, but now, rather than giving you the present form of the verb to be, sum es est, sumus estis sunt, that would mean I was heard, you were heard, we have the imperfect form. So it's now I had been heard. Literally, I was having been heard, I had been heard. Auditus eram. One little be careful moment here is that it is I had been heard. You don't want to say that it's I have been heard, you have been heard, because if you confuse have with had, then you are turning it from pluperfect into an alternative form of the perfect passive. So it must be, just like in our normal actives, I had been heard, just like audi waram must be I had heard. So it's I had been heard, you had been heard, he had been heard. Again, if this was audita erat, it would be she had been heard. Auditi eramus, we had been heard. Auditi eratis, you plural had been heard. Auditi erant, they had been heard. If indeed this was the Amazonian women had been heard by Hercules, then it would be auditai with an ae again, erant. Here's the same example, but in the pluperfect. Rome had been built. Aedificata erat. Again, it is the imperfect form of the verb to be that tells us that we are dealing with a pluperfect passive. Let's look at some examples of these. Leo ab Hercule tandem occisos est. Castra a Romanis in campis aedificata erant. Ego ab Atiensibus captus sum. Verbis ducis omnes excitati eramus. Brevi tempori ab hostibus victus es. Let's now look at the translations of these. the first three. We've got these first three over here. The lion, leo, okisus est, was killed. Okisus est, the lion was killed. Okisus est, telling us that we are dealing with the perfect passive voice. So if I were being asked about that in, for instance, a syntax chart, you would say, what voice is it? It is passive. What person is it? Third person, because it's he. The lion was killed. Singular or plural? Well, it's singular because it's okisus est. So it would be perfect, passive, third person, singular. The lion was killed at last by Hercules. The next one. Castra a Romanis in campis aedificata erant. That next bit then, telling us that we are dealing with aedificata erant. It is the imperfect form of sum, which means that it's pluperfect passive. Perfect passive participle aedificata, followed by the imperfect form of sum, means that it's pluperfect passive. The camp had been built by the Romans on the fields. Third one. Ego ab Atiensibus captus sum. Ego, I, captus sum, was captured by the Athenians. Captus sum. Obviously, passives are very often followed by the instrument of their passivity, if you will, by ab plus an ablative. And here it's I was captured by the Athenians. Notice again, captus sum, present tense of the verb to be. If it was ego captus eram, then it would be the pluperfect passive, I had been captured. First person, here it's first person singular, perfect passive. The last two sentences, everyone, not long to go. Verbis ducis omnes excitati eramus. We had all, omnes, we had all, eramus here, imperfect form with the perfect passive participle. We had all been stirred up. We had all been stirred up by the words, verbis ducis, genitive, of the leader. Excitati eramus. First person plural, pluperfect passive. We had all been stirred up by the words of the general. Brevi tempori, in a short while, time when ablative. Victus es, you were conquered by the enemy, or by the enemies, whichever you want to say. Victus es, second person, singular, perfect passive. Es is the word for you are. It's the present tense of the form sum, following the perfect passive participle. So it's in a short while, you were defeated by the enemy. Two things to look at. Note this form. It is the perfect passive participle, paratus, auditus, followed by the correct form of esse. So sum, es, sumus estis sunt, if we want to make it the perfect passive, I was prepared, you were prepared. Or eram eras erat, if we want to make it auditus eram, I had been heard. Auditus eras, you had been heard. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the perfect and passive voice. Perfect and pluperfect passive voice.